Well, hello, it's the Trump Democrat. How you guys doing? So, I've been putting out some videos on current events, but I haven't really put one out that says who I am and what my philosophy is. So, I'm going to try to do that now. So, I'm a registered Democrat who voted for Donald Trump, hence the name Trump Democrat, kind of like the term Reagan Democrat in the 80s was used for Democrats who were Democrats and generally agreed with the overall philosophy, most of the Democratic Party, but at that time, they felt Reagan was the best choice for X, Y, and Z. Whatever reasons, everybody has their own. And so, me in the 2016 election, even though being a registered Democrat, found the problems with Hillary Clinton and the corruption at the DNC and everything would not allow me to vote for Hillary Clinton. So I've been involved with politics for a long time, and I early in life I was a hardcore conservative. Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, you name it. I worked for Jeb Bush's gubernatorial campaign in 2002. I worked for George W. Bush's campaign in 2004. I actually was on the stage when he came to speak to at a campaign rally down here. Um, so I've been a I've been on the right. So around 2007, 2008, my views began to shift a little bit. And why did this happen? Well, if you remember, we had the financial meltdown, the financial crisis that happened then. And that really shook my views, especially economically, because I was a true believer. Okay. I believed that if you cut taxes, including for the very wealthy, and reduce regulation, which is what we did in the George W. Bush administration, that things would be better for everybody, that businesses would use the money to hire, raise wages, there'd be more jobs, more prosperity for everybody, a rising tide lifts all boats, you name it, all the cliche right wing talking points and lines. That's what I truly, truly believed in. I didn't, you know, hate people that were in the lower rungs of the economic spectrum. I just felt like that would probably be the best way to get them, you know, risen to the middle class. So after the financial crisis, when the right, they of course they were in charge at the time, so they had to come out with damage control, and their what they were throwing out there just really, as somebody who had been involved in the politics, stayed on top of the news, knew what was going on, I found it really disingenuous. They said, okay, yes, we cut taxes and regulation, but you see, we just didn't cut enough taxes and enough regulation. We would cut a little bit more. Um, then everything would have been fine. Wouldn't have had this whole meltdown. Case closed, right? And these crooked banks, trying to put people into homes they can't afford, and um, these people taking out big mortgages, way more than they can afford. Who do they think they are? What's going on here? And it's all government regulation, trying to force the banks to loan to poor people that can't afford to pay it back. That's how everything went down. And that's just really not the case. Okay, it's really not how it happened. Okay, consumer demand is the biggest driver of the economy. And since the 80s, and even more so in the early 90s, with the fall of the Soviet Union, Americans have been treated to a different kind of capitalism than we were accustomed to before. When the Soviets fell, the American capitalists really felt like they could just take the gloves off because there's no other alternative. There's nothing else that works. You're just going to be stuck with our system. So they really, really began treating the American worker in a totally different way than we had experienced in decades past. Now, this lowering of pay and raising of expenses uh, decreasing the purchasing power of the consumer, how is this big capitalist machine going to make up for that? Well, credit, debt. We've got to give people loans so they can keep buying our stuff. And that might be helpful if wages were in maybe a dip. Okay, say you had rising wages and then, they plateaued and maybe even recessed a little bit, but a few years later they would eventually start, you know, ticking up, but that's not what happened. They continue to go down or if you're lucky stay the same because there's so many downward pressures economically on wages right now that it's almost impossible for them to substantially increase, especially with automation taking over in our economy. Every day, fewer and fewer workers are needed, and this is a huge downward pressure on wage growth. And this is really not a problem the free market can fix because this is a problem the free market is driving. The free market is pushing this apocalypse on us because it's very good for their short term profitability. And that's what seems to be driving the market. It's not about long term growth, it's about what we can do to make a lot of money now. We'll sell the stock. Who cares 10 years from now? Now, someone who's been a avid follower of politics since the mid 90s, I've seen the political back and forth. So, I remember in the 90s how big the Republicans were on debt, paying the debt down and eliminating the deficit. That was a big goal. Then when, George W. Bush came into office, they gave most of that to the rich and but that didn't matter. You know, that didn't matter. And then, as soon as President Obama was elected, they went right back, like turning a page in a book to, crying about the debt and the deficit every 5 minutes. It's not genuine. It's not something they really care about at the end of the day. It's just something to, beat the other side over the head with when they're not in power. But Democrats are not very good at all at playing politics, so they fall for it every time. So then, as I began to experience this change of viewpoint on economics, this adjustment to what I had previously believed, um, I had to look at other issues beyond economics too and think, well, maybe I was wrong about some of those too. Let me re examine my viewpoints. So I really tried to wrap my head around issues like abortion, for instance, and say, well, these people on the left that I agree with economically, what am I not what do they see that I'm not seeing on this? Because they're there and I'm just not seeing it. So is there some argument, something out there that I haven't heard before that's just going to be mind shattering on this and completely shift, my viewpoint? And the closest I ever got was kind of the argument Al Sharpton makes, that, well, you can think abortion's wrong and whatever, but it shouldn't be a legal issue. It's not for the government to regulate. Not convincing, but that was about as close as I could get. So, no, I don't take a straight right or left path at all. It's not right versus left, it's right versus wrong. And when I say that, I don't mean the right is right and the left is wrong. I mean, on certain issues, one side is right, certain issues, the other side is right. It's the best I can come up with, which can make, politicking a little hard because you have to support somebody who you probably don't agree with on substantial issues. And you know what? That's okay. All you can really do is endorse and support the person who most represents your values and try and help them understand where and when they're wrong. And that's all you can do. Won't change everybody's mind, might not change any minds, but that's still the best you can do. And, another thing that's always helped me has been always to have a willingness to look at the other side of the argument to hear it out and to consider it. And most of the time, it probably won't be convincing, but if you keep an open mind once in a while, you will hear something that at least makes you think about something a little bit differently. And that's really all I'm trying to do. If I can make a couple people think about some things a little bit differently, then that's about the best you can hope for.